Late one night, a guy gets into one of the vaults of Fort Knox, and he grabs as much gold coins as he can, throws it into a huge bag. No one really knows how much he stole, but as he's walking out, there's a guard, and the guard catches him basically holding the bag. And so what he says is, "How about I give you half the money that's in here, and I'll give you a $2,000 bonus." And so they make the deal, and he takes off. But the guard, who's thrilled at his luck, right? He's walking out, and he gets stopped by a second guard. And it's the same bribe, half the money plus a $2,000 bonus thrown in. Second guard is like, great. But as he's getting ready to go out the door, he gets stopped by a third guard, and it's the same dynamic. Half of that money plus 2,000 thrown in. Right? Now, the original burglar, when he finally gets out of Fort Knox, right, he has mixed emotions. I mean, he did leave with more than he came in with. I mean, 9,000 more. And he's free, right? But he thought of all the money he left behind, right? And he was pretty sad. And of course, by now, you know enough to figure out how much he had taken in the first place. The math problem that I had as a child, 6th or 7th grade, was just like that. Except it had to do with bananas and 3 men on an island and taking naps and dividing it by 3 and throwing stuff off the island. But it was equivalent mathematically to this problem, where you didn't know how many bananas they started with. And there was this kind of constant processing of figuring out what happened and how the pile was diminishing. And the question at the end was, how many bananas did you start with? Much like, how many gold coins did you start with when the robber took money from Fort Knox? It was an extra credit puzzle. Just do it if you have some time. And yet that puzzle changed my life, because that puzzle I took to my dad, and after dinner we sat down, and he decided that he would teach me algebra on that night. Now, here's the thing. I thought I knew algebra, right? Because when you study in school and you're going through the stuff, it's really simple. They tell you, you move this over to the other side of the equal sign and you just make it negative, or you move this over to here. And so I had all the mechanics down, but I didn't really understand how it worked. I understood what to do. I didn't understand why you would do it. And that made him very frustrated. So he started teaching me math. He started writing down equations, and he started asking me to write down equations. And of course, we only used X and sometimes Y. He was using R and S and T, and he was doing T sub 1 and T sub 2, and I didn't understand what he was doing. And we sat there from about 8 at night until after midnight. We finally got a number. I mean, and it was tears. I was exhausted, and he was proud. He'd taught his son algebra that night, and I didn't think he had, only to discover years later that I really learned most of math in that single night. But what really got me was that when we were all said and done, he said, "Let's check our work." I said, "Okay." Now, you got to remember, this is, I was maybe 11 or 12. That was in 1980, 81, 82, something like that. We were one of the few folks that had a personal computer in the house, and my dad turned around and walked to the computer, and he, turned it on and went and wrote a small little batch program. He wrote, in BASIC at the time, he wrote a little set of formulas to output and write to screen, starting from some ridiculous number building up or building down, to get at these equations to figure out what the right answer was. And what would happen is, if you did it right, it would output the first number and the last number, what you initially started with in terms of bananas, and the last number. And the trick was, you'd have to find it where both were whole numbers, where they were integers, no partials. And he would just print it to screen. And so he ran the program and he hit print. And so it just started spitting out stuff, right? And when it was all done, it stopped printing, and he teared it off, and he looked at it, right? And he found the one that had whole numbers, and he's like, "Oh, look, it matches our answer." Mind you, he did that, both writing the code and printing it and looking it over. He finished that in about 3 minutes. And I remember feeling like, if you could have solved this problem in 3 minutes instead of 3 or 4 hours, why didn't you? Right? This was extra credit. We didn't have to do this, and we definitely didn't have to spend 4 hours fighting. But the point for him was that I learned. And the point for him was that I knew why I would do what I did, not just how to do it or what to do. Why? At this point, you're like, what does this have to do with anything? Right? Why am I telling you this story? I find that more often than not, a lot of us learn what to do. We learn how to move things or how to type things or code things or do whatever it is we do. We learn the mechanics of it without often understanding the background for it, without understanding the why. Maybe you're writing code and so you copy someone else's code, but you don't understand what it's doing, or you don't understand why the first 2 steps are there when the third step is the only thing you care about. You want shortcuts, right? And we all ask for shortcuts. I mean, you can look at all the posts in the world and all the questions, and everybody's doing the same thing. We're all asking for shortcuts. And I want to submit to you that the real answer is to not take shortcuts. The real answer is to spend a deep amount of time stepping into something to learn. Because when you learn it, when you truly understand it, it changes the trajectory of your life. In that single night, not only did I learn math, I learned the value of computers to solve business questions. I learned that when you combine a computer with thinking and the ways to break down a problem, you can actually have it do a lot of work for you. I mean, I learned so much in that single night. And it did. It made me much more inclined towards business problems, much more inclined towards computing, much more inclined towards technology. All right, in a single night. But all because we'd gone deep. And more often than not, people want to know, what's the secret? What's the shortcut? How can I bypass all the work? And the answer, my take is, you're asking the wrong question. You shouldn't be asking, how can I bypass all the work? What's the shortcut? You ought to be asking, what's the long way? Right? What should I do with deep effort? What should I do with serious intent that allows me to learn the most and has the maximum impact on the trajectory of my life? What can I invest in such a way that when I come out of it, on the other end of it, no matter how much I cried, no matter how hard it was, no matter how rough and struggle I felt, that on the end of it, it will have a significant impact on everything I do going forward? That is a question you ought to ask your peers, your mentors, your family. But not, what's the quickest way? What's the shortcut? How can I bypass and skip everything else? Sometimes it's worth taking the long and hard road so that you understand something deeply. Because then when you understand it deeply, you have a way to provide value to others, because you're not just having a cursory amount of knowledge on a lot of topics. You actually go deep in some areas. And I've discovered over the last 20 years professionally that I am worth more because of the struggles that I fought than I am for all the little things where I had quick wins. So embrace the pain. Thanks.